Life aboard a deep space vessel is, in one word, boring as all hell. We have to take turns being awake and in and out of cryo sleep because we're out here for several decades, at least human decades at a time. This is why, of course, everyone here is single, which you would think would bring to interesting situations, consider there's two males and two females here. However, we are on a rotation. One person is up for approximately 1 year, and then they get to fall back asleep. We're going to be out here for about 20 years, and that's a long time to be alone. Unfortunately, the only person you have to talk to is the AI. That being said, if we get a distress call or anything like that, we are to immediately wake up the crew. It was during one of my rotations that we found the stray. A stray is just a slang term for a lone escape pod. This almost never ever happens. Immediately, I scanned it to make sure everything was online, because if it was just powered down with nothing inside, why the hell would even worry? Well, the scans came out positive that there were bio readings and the systems were still running just fine. So immediately, I hit the emergency wake for the rest of the crew, and they were not happy about it. As they stumbled to their feet from the quick wake up, which usually takes about an hour to 90 minutes, they had to do in about 15. To put in perspective for anyone not coming out of cryosleep, it's the idea of only getting 2 hours of sleep. The moment you hit REM sleep, you get up and you're all groggy as hell. Multiply that by about 50 or 60, and you get the general idea. As they all stumbled to the bridge, I informed them on what had been found, and to my surprise, nobody put up a fuss. I had already started the maneuvering so that we could pick it up. However, it would be interesting. This thing looks like it was not just shot out in the direction of any planet or anything like that, but just randomly shot, which means it's going to tumble, which means it's going to be very interesting. Thankfully, me and Jane were able to suit up and get ready to retrieve this pod. Luke is one of the best pilots I've ever seen, so he was able to maneuver the ship so that the cargo bay was open and the egg would just slide on in, and we would just have to catch it. It should be noted catching in zero G is interesting. As the pod came in, we both tried to grab a hold of it as our feet were magnetically locked to the surface. It had a bit of inertia, but again, zero gravity, which means we could grab it and hold it by ourselves. It was enough that Jane lost footing. One of her feet actually was yanked up. I told her to eat another cheeseburger. She looked at me and said, "It's zero G, asshole." Yeah, she's always been a little bit of a bitch. But hey, that's what happens when you only get a little bit of sleep. Once we had the pod inside, everything was restored artificial gravity, and everyone came down to the cargo bay so we could crack this egg open. Normally, what you do is you slowly shut the power down and the systems will kick in so that the people inside could defrost. Unfortunately, we were getting some very strange bio readings and we had to get that pod open. So, we did the next best thing. We did a rush job. And this is just something done for medical requirements if you're not sure if the person's going to survive the process of coming to. The side effect is they don't wake up usually for another hour. It's a bit of a shock to the system, so their bodies have to recover. To our absolute shock, when we cracked this egg open, we didn't find one person, even though the pod is designed for only one. We found two you know what? I don't want to say people. There was a human male and a female. The are surprisingly human in the way they look. The only difference is their skin is a very, very pale, back when I was on the ground, an infantry blue. Most people might know it as sky blue. Very, very pale. And the hair is white silverish. It's very strange. They still have the same amount of digits, same amount of appendages. Hell, their faces look very similar. However, due to the fact that their planet is not considered a level 18 death world like ours and only a level 2, which is almost at the level of Paradise World, they're very, well, small. They're usually quite delicate. They don't fight very well. However, they are exceptional engineers, which kind of made everybody wonder what in the hell they were looking at. Why were these two on top of each other in one escape pod? And where in the hell are their oh, crap. Oh, jeez. God, ugh. This is why they say that stuff about us humans. Anyways, it wasn't long before Linda told us, hey, let's get these two to the medical. And we picked up the boat and we got them in there. Thankfully, they'd already started to thaw, so they weren't stuck together. Though, just when I thought, hey, this is the most excitement we're going to get, we started the medical scanners to make sure they were okay and received one of the biggest shocks I ever think I got in my whole life. With our genetics being similar but just far enough off, how in the hell is she pregnant?
After retrieving the two personnel that were in the pod, we had to clean them off in order to separate them. The stasis pods do tend to leave a little bit of a strange residue. Most of it's just leftover ether, which comes off pretty easy. But as we did that, I got a quick look at the one that wasn't quite human. And the female was really weird. We know this species. And they're also called the Akunachin. I keep mispronouncing it, but that's as close as I get on working it slow. The female is, well, rather bluish, almost like pale blue. So I'm looking at, for a moment, I thought she was kind of low on oxygen, and then I realized she wasn't purple, but no, just this really pale blue. Her hair was also blue, which was surprising. I know this species, and this is odd. Usually they have like a silver whitish hair on top of their head. It doesn't make sense. What the heck? I mean, as we hosed them off, I realized that her slick body, just like the rest of her species, was still intact. There was no outside injuries. Yet she was so thin that we worried that we might hurt her just moving her from the gurney to the shower and back again. As me and Luke were able to deal with the male over in the next room, we realized he was in really good shape. This was to be expected since he did have modifications just like all the rest of us, but something was off. These modifications were of the really old style. This was odd. Why would somebody give a shit about those? I mean, who would go through that? Those old ones hurt like hell. I mean, the new ones, whatever. It's a couple shots and you're usually unconscious. But these ones? Nah, he had to go through the whole thing. We began checking his blood through DNA registry once we realized he had all his parts, and we found nothing. We expanded the search even deeper as much as we could and found nothing. We couldn't figure out who this guy was. There was no identification. The guy came out, well, wearing nothing. So we had to check and see if there was anything else. And there was a couple additional items actually in the pod. Luke finds these handheld weapons and he holds them up, and his response was, seriously? These things? These are antiques. He wasn't kidding in the least little bit, as I realized they were both a type of energy bolt caster, but seriously, these things are old. It's like comparing the strange old matchlocks they used to use when firearms first started to a railgun back in the late 20th century. It's crazy. Why would they have things like this? I mean, seriously, looking at this in the blood registry, I'm starting to wonder how long have those two been out here? Luke and I were discussing things at length, at least as much as we could. We tried to match the weapon up, we tried to check the serial number, turns out there wasn't one, so this was a personal use weapon. So what the heck was he doing out here, and how come we can't find anything? As we discussed things, we realized that he was starting to wake up, and when he did, it wasn't pretty. He started thrashing wildly as though PTSD had got a hold of him. He started reaching out and swinging as hard as he could, screaming at the top of his lungs. and we tried our best to hold him down, telling him to calm down as much as we could. And then we started yelling at him, "Look, hey, you're aboard the SS Warsaw Rising. Calm down. You're not on an enemy craft. Calm down." The man recognized our words and shocked and asked, "What?" The way he answered showed he wasn't completely thawed out, even though you're not actually frozen in stasis, but it showed that he wasn't quite there yet. I had to speak slowly. "This is the Deep Space Search and Recovery Vessel, SS Warsaw Rising." He began to speak to us again, but I was having trouble figuring out this strange accent. What we could figure out is he said his name was Klaus, and that's what. So, Klaus, are you okay? Uh, what's with your companion? As soon as we mentioned that, he started screaming things like, "Where is she? Where is she? Where'd you put her? Where'd you take her?" And started screaming obscenities and started screaming, "Where is Grace? Where's Grace? Where is it?" And we tried to calm him down. Luke screamed, "Oh, you mean the blue?" With that, Klaus screamed, "What?" Clearly pissed off. Luke said, "She's fine. She's being examined by the rest of the crew." Klaus then began to fight us and trying to get out of bed. We couldn't allow this. You see, moving after a long stasis or having a quick thaw is very, very bad. It's a very, very bad idea. You need to give your body a few hours to restart or risk massive internal injuries if you're not careful. This is why I worried about the quick thaw with the crew earlier, but they were able to handle it, even though I could tell Luke wasn't feeling 100% at all himself. Even so, with the amount of thrashing around Klaus was doing, he's going to tear something. He's going to rip open his liver, rupture his kidneys, dislodge his spleen, something bad, something really bad. So we kept trying to calm him down, but Klaus didn't seem to care. No matter how many times we told him, if you don't calm down, you're going to hurt yourself. Eventually, he just started swinging hard and punched Luke right in the face. Luke staggered backwards, and I immediately got back and slammed this Klaus guy right in the jaw. Down he goes, and as soon as his head fell down, he was out. Not knowing how long he was going to be out, I immediately reached over, grabbed a sedative, and jabbed it into his thigh. Thankfully, he'll be out for about an hour, given his size and the amount of sedative I gave him. I checked on Luke, and he was okay. A little worse for wear, you could say, but he would recover just fine. He had his modifications, and he'd heal up okay. As Klaus slept, I decided to go check on the ladies. The Blue herself was barely reaching consciousness as I walked in. I could see the look on the girls' faces as they watched her come into her own. You see, coming out of stasis is harsh on the body, but bringing a unborn child out of stasis is touchy at best, even with our technology now, and it takes much, much longer. If we had known that she was actually knocked up, we wouldn't even have brought her out of stasis anywhere near this fast. We would have done it really slow, but now we have to worry about what is now. The girls were moving around, constantly checking everything, doing their best to attend to both the girl and what was inside her. And that's when I asked if there was anything I could do to help. I knew too many fingers in the pie, so to speak, would just get in everybody's way, so I stayed stepped back. Yet suddenly they turned, looked at each other, and then turned and asked, "What's your blood type again?" I, of course, told them, and I've realized really quick that I was the only one on this entire ship that would be absolutely perfect for a blood rotation. This is not exactly a transfusion. This is actually something more interesting. You see, the way it works is that the stasis kind of lowers the blood temperature and also takes a lot of nutrients out of the system, which is why it takes a long time for the body to recover. By moving the cold blood into me and then putting the warm blood from me into her, it would not shock her system like it would if we just simply stuck her in someplace warm. And this would also definitely bring a lot of nutrients into her blood, as it's well known that our blood is much richer in nutrients than anything the Blues have. And to save the woman and the child, I didn't hesitate for a moment. I simply stepped forward and stuck my arms out and said, "Do it." They immediately ran over with the syringes, tubes, and everything else they had. This can easily keep the female and her child safe once everything starts going, but there will be risks, but not to them. You see, cryo blood leaving the body doesn't mean jack. And of course, my blood going in can help them out. The issue is the blood coming out and going into me. Anybody receiving blood from anybody coming out of cryo like this is not going to have many nutrients, and it's pretty likely that the body could go into shock. You have to be very careful, but I'm protecting two lives here, not just my own. The girls asked for me to sit down, but I decided to stay standing the entire time. I sat there and watched my blood go back and forth into this blue and then back to me. Or maybe it was her blood going into me. I don't know, and I didn't really care. All I knew is that I stood there trying desperately not to screech from the pain. This was like having your blood cells, along with your veins, arteries, muscles, and bones, implode and explode at the same time while they freeze and burn to a crisp at the same time. The pain began radiating up my arm from where the syringe was going in, down through my hand to the point where I could not move my hand anymore. The pain radiated up into the shoulder, which I could handle, but as it started going into my torso and up my neck, I put my head back and I tried not to show. But that was the point where Linda walked up with a small handkerchief and wiped the tears that were coming out of my eyes. That is how painful it is. I stood over them for at least an hour as I was afraid to sit down, as the girls went around doing everything they could. I don't think either of them stayed still for more than about 4 seconds while they continued to watch over, taking all sorts of vital signs, bringing all sorts of equipment over, sometimes cracking it right into my leg, which didn't help the pain at all, but it did distract me just a little bit, which I appreciated. After about that hour, Klaus was brought in via a repulsor lift chair, as he was more or less rolled in through the door. When he got next to me, he realized what I was doing, as this has been a common practice ever since stasis ever started. He went over and I moved myself to the side just a little bit more so he could get close to this blue. He called her Grace. My Grace. I didn't know if that was a name or it's like that silly movie where they were stroking a round piece of gold, calling it precious. I don't know. I don't know, and I didn't really care at that point. All I knew is that the blue began to open her eyes. As she did, they began to disconnect me from her as she came to full fruition. Once she realized what was going on, she proceeded to freak the hell out with all the humans around. She began screaming about, "Don't hurt me! My baby! I'm with child! Where's my mate?" And all sorts of almost uncontrollable rants, single lines, but they were not connected at all in any type of one thought. As she was freaking out, both Jane and Linda tried to hold her down to keep her from thrashing about, as they weren't sure if she'd completely thawed out. They began to tell her, "Relax. While we release the machines and restraints that hold you, please hold still before you hurt yourself." This got the Blue's attention as she realized that both Linda and Jane were speaking in her language. This Blue's eyes got really, really wide and seemed to be focusing on us. Klaus was trying to say something, but he was also put back at what we were speaking. We were speaking fluent Akhenaten, and he was just amazed by this. Grace was finally released from all the straps, and she was slowly sat up as the girls helped her. She saw Klaus, and to hell with waiting, she went and jumped on him. And, of course, I wanted to reach over and grab that sheet and wrap over her to keep her from being exposed, but it seemed like she didn't really give a shit. I would have been happier to see all this display of affection, but I was on my way to the floor. The stasis blood was making me very, very dizzy. and it was like I was drunk, hungover, and got a concussion at the same time. Not fun. As the crew checked on me, Klaus said, "What's his problem?" as he looked at me. The ancient accent that he was using was very difficult to follow. The crew told him about the blood transfer and how it's dangerous for me. Of course, he understood. But Grace should be feeling like a million billion credits right about now. The blue in the lady's face had actually come back from a almost white blue to just a little bit darker, which is something we realized that she had finally finished thawing herself out. Her blue hair still surprised me, and I focused on it, as all the others have silver in their hair. It's strange. It was just blowing me for a loop. I didn't understand it, but I needed to focus on something before I ended up face planting on the floor. As the crew made sure that I was all right, I looked over and asked, "Before I pass out, what is the last Earth year you remember?" When I said that, the crew just stopped and looked at me really strange for a moment. Then Klaus simply relaxed his face and said, "Earth year 2142, why?" Grabbing the adrenaline that's right next to me, I immediately pulled off the top and stuck it in my thigh and hit the plunger. It's not enough to send you into absolute fits of rage and have you bouncing on the walls, but it definitely will keep you awake. "It's a good thing you're still sitting down," I said. "We need to tell you both something." Inside the medical bay, I look over at the two looking back at me. This couple still holding on to each other, wondering why I just told them they need to listen because things have changed. A lot of things have changed. It's clear as I speak, Grace is completely confused as her head keeps moving back and forth, trying to figure out what's going on. Seeing this, Linda simply walked over and, as politely as possible, began to translate, as Jane, on the other hand, kept trying to reach over and pull that sheet back up over Grace and her unbelievably smooth, solid blue skin. I'll admit, even looking at her back, if I had my wits about me after this blood transfer, I would be constantly staring. But right now, I'm able to focus on something else. Focus on what I need to tell them. The only issue is that as I try to begin my explanation, I can hear Jane just about yelling over at Grace that she needs to cover herself. And Luke and I, for a moment, turn to each other and begin to crack up just a little bit. Before I even get the words out, Luke simply says, "Did you forget that they don't wear much clothing at all?" I jive in with this and say, "The most I've ever seen them wear is like a large sweater. Hell, it's usually just some old workout top and maybe some shorts or a skirt or something." Jane turns and shoots us a glare, seeming that we're just, guys, just commenting on how pretty this other girl is. Grace turns back to Luke, and then she turns over to Linda and asks Linda to translate. I immediately say, "Save your questions until the end. There's a lot we need to go through." As I speak, of course, Linda is saying everything a little bit lower and basically whispering in Grace's ear so she's not trying to talk over me. Okay, here's the thing. You should already know about the awakening when the veil was lifted, on what the species around the cosmos were doing to us as human beings, coming in and doing all the taking and experimenting and stuff. Then, of course, after we realized what was going on, the battles on Earth, and, you know, we beat them. We beat them hard, and we were able to beat them off the rock. But the losses at the time, I'm sure you remember, were calculated at about 2.5 billion. Well, the true number eventually did come out, and it was actually like 4.1. This is one of the reasons the governments and the assholes that run them didn't actually argue about when we start altering ourselves. In fact, you have a few of the original alterations built into you, I know that much. The blue girl, Grace, heard the translation and began to pull back and look over and didn't see any cuts or anything like that on Klaus's body. She then looked down and was taking special attention to the extremely well developed abdomen of Klaus, rubbing her hand across it and wondering if this was fake or real. I could see it in her eyes. Before things turned towards the more intimate from the way she was caressing his body, I continued. The Blues, like Grace here, were actually not our enemies. At least we didn't realize they weren't our enemies. I'm sure you've heard the whole thing about friend of my enemy is my enemy and all that. Well, we knew nothing but the fact that they defended the Greys when we chased the Greys all the way back to the Blues territory. I'm sure you read all about this too. It wasn't until later on we found out that the Blues were actually, well, they were answering the distress call from the Greys. And, well, yeah, it wasn't actually them trying to fight us anyway. It was a complete misunderstanding, a loss of translation. And yeah, all that fighting was really shouldn't have happened. I stopped right there to let everything settle for a second before continuing. I saw in Klaus's eyes that he was like, holy shit. I seen the weapon he was carrying. That was a government issue weapon. That meant that he was fighting. That means he got caught up in that shit. I continued, our biggest loss was when the five armies fought in the Sarish system. As soon as I said that, though, I saw the reaction on Klaus's face. His eyes got really, really wide. And then he looked over at his girl, and she looked a bit confused. And then it seemed as though he clenched down on her body just a little bit. I could tell he was remembering. I've seen this happen before. This is what happens when a soldier tries to come to terms with everything that's happened. I continued with, that's probably the battle you were in, I'm guessing. He gave a quick nod. I say this because you also mentioned 2142, the last date that you remember. All the species suffered extreme losses in that battle, and it was in 2142. It is of note, since this is about where your knowledge lines out, is where all the species actually suffered extreme losses. All five species in that battle got beat to shit. As that point, we all just kind of pulled back and licked our wounds and then got ready for the next fight. The standard ebb and flow of warfare was there. It was a stalemate. The five armies came in, you didn't know which way to shoot, and eventually you trying just not to shoot your own people because it was a complete total mess. I remember how bad it was. With that, Klaus actually turned his head a little bit and looked at me. Then I continued, the fight actually came to us as we were preparing for the next ones. He then looked at me really confused, and before I could say anything, all three of my crewmates went, the fucking crabs! I paused for a moment before considering what to say, but then I kind of caught myself. Well, you have to remember, these crabs, okay, you haven't seen them. So let me describe them real quick. They're about twice the size of our standard military tanks at that time. For their size, they're extremely fast. They're strong enough to easily lift up one of these tanks and basically start ripping into it with those four claws they have. And worst of all, though, they're really smart. And before we knew it, the lizards, they were nearly annihilated. We didn't even know they were under attack for a while. And many of them actually ran to us for sanctuary, screaming out to help for them. And at first, many of our captains thought, well, we'll just kill off the lizards and we'll be done. Although it's a good thing, and we're very grateful that they listened to these cries for help, as it actually gave us insight on what was coming and gave us a few years to prepare. While that happened, the Greys were hit next. And I'll give it to them. They didn't break very easy at all. Though that's actually kind of from help from us, I guess you could say. You see, when the crabs went into the Greys' territory, they found that the Greys had so many defenses that were layered across each other with the intersecting fields of fire, just layers upon layers, a giant castle defense that they actually learned from us. And when those layers are several dozens of layers deep, it's just, oh man, the grind getting through these was crazy. Unfortunately, as well as they put up a fight, they still lost. They got scattered all across the void, and now, simply put, they're lost out there somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if they're in some sort of stasis right now, hoping that they can find another one or two of their own. Maybe they can start their species up again. I don't know. All I know is we had recordings of this invasion. We were able to sneak in some of our stealth ships just to observe. Many of these stealth vessels don't have any weapons. If they're found, all they can do is run and or try to disappear, run silent, run deep, but they got some really interesting video, and trust me, you do not want to see them. It's horrific. They went on the ground, they went into the ships, and they just seemed to enjoy tearing everyone asunder. Their carapaces are extremely tough. Seriously, I believe your standard pulse pistol over there might tickle them, and that was it. Because of their structure, we had to get very inventive in the way we dealt with things. But we did have time at that point, but time was running out. But still, just watching just a few minutes of that was enough for everyone to realize that this wasn't just a war for territory. This wasn't a war for securing anything. These motherfuckers wanted to kill all of us. Klaus looked around. He saw the crew was nodding, but they didn't want to keep eye contact for some reason. This seemed to confuse him as I continued. When we went over to the Blues, we showed up and actually offered them help. And this was actually a surprise to them. They didn't want our help. We just sat there with our fleet on the very edge of their territory. And we watched. We knew the crabs were coming in a certain direction. We were fairly close. With maximum magnifications, we could just barely see the fight happening. Usually it was a bunch of just flashes in space, but some of the optics they had back then weren't so bad. Yet we still had to wait. We still needed permission. We couldn't just go balls to the walls in there, or else those we're trying to protect would end up shooting at us, and that kind of defeats the purpose, does it not? As we watched, the Blues kept swinging their weapons back and forth towards us, then towards the crabs. They'd shoot the crabs, force the crabs to slow down, then they'd turn towards us. Then the crabs would move forward, then they'd turn back. I don't know what the hell they were thinking, even turning towards us. They couldn't hit us at that distance. And we just held position and waited. And we constantly sent a message in their own language saying the same thing. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You are not our enemy. The enemy is assaulting you. And this was in their language. Over and over and over we sent it. And eventually, they must have realized we weren't freaking kidding. And they accepted our aid. And the entire human fleet drove in, did a micro flip right there and right next to the enemy. And I mean really, really close. I know in the Battle of Ceres you guys were close, but distances have extended. Still, it might as well have just been a knife fight. We were so close. But when we came in, nobody was playing any types of games. We came in all guns blazing with the order, kill them all. The main weapons began to fire immediately as they're set up on a different engine so they can fire as soon as we come out of the fold. The main ballistic weapons are guided, or those that were guided, it didn't matter. Those that were guided went out on volleys. Those that were unguided were immediately fired as they were basically the keel of the ship. And they could rip through one of the crab ships like it was absolutely nothing. The las cannons began to cut through the crab ships, slicing them parts off. Usually we came in on the flank, so they were giving us right their port side, their ventral side, or something we had a very big target of. Many of our capital ships carry directed energy weapons. and we fired on the crab massive ships. And if nothing else, we sent penetrative rounds through with nukes and sent shrapnel everywhere. Our penetrators used an internal explosive to make sure that they had maximum effectiveness. This was lucky that we came up on the side, though, as we needed to come in from that angle to give the effect that we did. And the crabs decided that they were going to face us. So they turned and drove their ships towards us, which was very, very bad, especially since they were that close. And you're probably wondering why, because you never face these guys. You just have to understand that the crabs, for all their giant bravado and giant bodies, that is, their primary weapon is themselves. They'll actually kamikaze a ship right into yours. There's some sort of weird foam that comes out and instantly locks in to make sure that they actually have some sort of atmosphere. Then they go out and they're climbing up the walls, they're crushing their way through corridors and using their massive exoskeleton and extreme strength to just kill and kill and kill, every once in a while pausing to take something they killed and take a bite because they're hungry. Because of this, the front of their ships are very, very heavily armored, which means when we first went in and we caught them on the flank, we could tear them the hell apart. The problem is, once they're facing you, getting through that armor, not so easy. Because of this, most of the point defense weapons were completely ineffective. They weren't going through the front of the ship. That is, except for the turreted railguns. You see, we got real smart when we realized that they were actually charging us like that, so we decided to dodge them, get on their side, and turn our turreted weapons and give them a full-on broadside. As it turns out, the front of the crab ships are extremely heavy armored, like I said. The sides, they're paper thin. Seriously, it's like putting hot piss through snow. It's so easy to get through those things. And with a full turreted broadside, they started getting torn apart. Not only that, but we sent out our drone swarms, and they began to latch on and just started cutting the ships open in large pieces. And we thought that would put them down easy, but it turns out crabs can actually survive in the vacuum for almost an hour. This was bad, as many of them actually tried to jump out of their ship and jump onto ours and cut their way in, not realizing that our military ships, especially our battleships, we have armor that's just as thick as the nose of theirs. So it didn't go so well for them, not to mention those turreted weapons, well, they were playing whack-a-crab, as they were simply knocking them off. It was crazy. And the battle ended when the crab command ship was destroyed with a directed energy weapon. Actually, several. It started shaking violently, started to crack, and then suddenly, kablooey, there it goes. And the crab fleet fell into absolute chaos at that point, not knowing where to go. It's like they needed some sort of guided coordinates from there, and it turned into a good old-fashioned turkey shoot. After the battle, we knew that the crabs, if they were going to retaliate, were going to come in from a certain direction. So we orientated our ships so that we were pointing all of our weapons towards where the crabs are going to come in, and we exposed our backs to the blues, standing as a shield. Our medics did what they could to save the blues that had been tore up, but as it turns out, they are rather fragile. They don't have the same type of abilities we do, especially with our alterations. Grace heard this, and she looked angry at the word fragile, realizing that whatever those two had done had definitely toughened her up just a little bit. I kind of chuckled at the thought, and then cleared my throat and continued. Well, you see, after beating the crabs, both species actually started talking to each other, actually talking. And they realized that there was just a difference in cultures, but there was a lot of similarities as well. I mean, in particular, like I said, the blues move almost as fast to an SOS beacon as we do. It's because they're rather empathetic, is the correct word. The main difference is that they're set up similar as a bee colony, or beehive, if you prefer, in the way their social structure is. You know, they have the queen and her court, and almost all the others are female. Only one male is born out of every 20 to 150 females. And you would think, hey, that guy's doing lucky. Well, not really. They're actually basically prisoners over there. It's not a fun life for them. Except for one aspect, they get to, have all that fun stuff going on, but yeah. And I will even bet you good credits that she has an image of her and her friends maybe back on her home planet, and there's not a single male in any of those images. I will bet you. I looked at Klaus a little closer, and then he looked down at her arm where she had some sort of readout device attached. As he took a few seconds to look, I thought, gotcha. I continued. I wanted to keep his mind on the subject, so I said, this caused some issues, as you can figure. Out of fear of humans contaminating their gene pool, we had to actually keep our distance or keep our suits on completely. Hell, I'll bet you never even looked the Blue in the face until she took her helmet off. Or maybe depolarized her helmet or something. And then you realized it's just a young lady. With that, Klaus kind of turned his head away, so I was like, yeah, gotcha. I continued on. While this was going on and we were trying to figure things out and build our forces up a little more, the crabs, well, they decided to come back. And they were very, very pissed off. You would think they'd take out the blues first, but nope. They came for us. A fleet 50 times larger than those trying to take over the blues came out of the void at around Saturn's orbit. Maybe they thought that was our planet or something. I don't know, and I don't care. All we know is there was no communication, just destruction. It is of note that even though they did all they could, giving the crabs a bloody nose and all as they trampled across, they tried to protect themselves, but Venus itself it was destroyed. Her fleet, her defenses, everything is just gone now. And once they took out Venus, they continued to advance on Earth and engaged it. The Earth fleet had not come back yet. Actually, humanity's fleet, the majority of it, was still protecting the Blues or out on recon or something like that. So it was going to take some time. As they engaged the Earth Defense Forces, we lost the Moon. Completely lost it. Our forces actually began to tear the crabs apart using our own weapons to try and keep them at a distance. As soon as they got within range, we just opened up and let them have both barrels. But they just kept coming. This time, they actually did carry some ballistic weapons around their ships, but boy, their accuracy was shit. And it turned into a fight of defenses. Their defenses, the front of their ships against our weapons, and our defenses trying to defend Earth. That's what came on, and the forces just kept getting closer and closer and closer to each other. As the crabs got within range of Earth, our directed energy weapons began to rip their command ships to pieces, quite literally, as it's able to basically cause an earthquake at the center of their own ships, being that these are basically Titan class. Although, thinking about it, they might be a little small for Titan class, but they're definitely bigger than our battleships, I'll tell you that. As these were being torn apart, our fleet finally arrived and caught the crabs in a good old-fashioned crossfire between the fleet and Earth. Eventually, they were able to move in close, spread out the fleet, and completely surrounded the crabs so that the crabs, if they fired across their own fleet, they had more chance of hitting each other than they did of hitting us. But the crabs had one more card to play. They launched a ship out of their formation at full speed, and even our orbital ballistics cannons just couldn't kill it. This thing was just armed like you would not believe. I've never seen anything shuck off rounds like that. It drove as fast as it could towards Earth like a rod from God himself, and it kept going and going, using its own thrusters and gravity of Earth to pull it faster and faster. And when it hit, it penetrated so deep that everybody thought their sensor data was wrong. Then it happened. A quantum singularity opened up and forced the planet to burst from everywhere at once. Every volcano, every single fault line, everything went. The crabs had already sent their own to the ground, and they were causing all sorts of havoc, but they were completely outmatched by all the weapons and forces down there. And we have a small video of the crabs actually cheering as they saw this thing hit, and they saw the ground start to tear apart under them. They seemed to just cheer like they're happy about this as they faced being absolutely annihilated. How suicidal were these frigging giant crustaceans? That's all we could think. I need to let you know that Earth at that point became unstable. And just like Venus and Luna, it's gone. The explosion sent a cascade of shrapnel in every single direction. It blew up like a 1980s cinematic space station, but not fast or anything like that. Absolutely not. You see, with its size of its mass, even with the explosion, it takes a while for all this debris to actually reach. Our fleet actually survived by either jumping out, dodging the debris as it came through, or simply using the crab fleet as a shield. And the crab fleet was completely torn asunder by everything going in. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts that those dumb, headless, motherless sons of bitches, they were probably smiling the whole way. It is of note that even before the attack, during the attack, and even during the explosion, hundreds of thousands of ships, shuttles, pods, and everything else was sent out to save as many as possible. Nobody wanted to be in the line of fire, and can't say that I blame them. It's part of why we're out here, because this is what we do. This ship and many others look for the remnants of that battle, like strays like yourself and things like that. We kind of need them, and especially what happened after the battle. Klaus jumps in. What happened after? I simply said, you know how angry someone gets if you hurt or kill a member of their family? Now multiply that by 1.6 billion still alive. Hell, we wouldn't even have that many if not for the blues helping us with our new enhancements. You see, Mars couldn't handle the influx of personnel. I mean, there's no way in hell one colony world can handle one full home world and then another world that was transformed into an agro world with that huge solar shade. And so the rest of us had to live on spaceships or space stations too. As for the crabs, well, the tech guys were able to figure out exactly where their home system is. Then we showed them what total war actually is. We drove towards their planets after we made sure that we have as many humans alive as possible, and left them behind to say, we're going to finish this job. We finished the job as we burned the crab planets with hydrogen-based nukes. We forced planets into breaking apart with our multiple directed energy weapons. We hunted down every single ship. We use nanomachines to tear them apart. There's a couple planets that are nothing but wobbling gray goo right now. Even those that tried to surrender were turned into molten slag. We didn't care. You crossed a motherfucking line with that. By the time we reached their homeworld, they didn't even have a tenth of the defenses that Earth had. We surrounded them and blasted every ship, pod, shuttle, whatever it was that tried to run. We were done playing games. And then we decided to have a little bit of poetic justice. We went up to their 7 moons, and we crashed them into the homeworld itself. We were able to somehow get a time on target, and we set a camera there to watch, because we didn't want to be around when this happened. Because when the moons hit, the force from coming from all different directions on this planet turned it into its own detonation. It reached critical mass with the implosion of all that mass coming in, and then it exploded with enough force to quite literally atomize everything for several planets in any direction. When it was over, we came back and realized that we could finally talk face to face with the Blues. They still fear us, but they know we are not their enemies. If anything, they helped us out even more than they even realized. just with simple supplies, medical supplies, food, and things of that nature. And actually, I should tell you, there's a small fact is they started to alter themselves a bit as well. I'm pretty sure that's why they have gray hair instead of the blue hair that you see here. Because all the others I've ever seen, it's silver, almost gray. It's weird to see. Klaus had almost fainted in his chair as his hands just fell to his sides. It was though his whole body had just given up on him as he stared forward. That is a lot to take in, he told me. Luke reached out, put his hand on Klaus's shoulder, and said, "Give it time." We realized that both Klaus and Grace were actually shaking at all this information. Klaus actually said, "One thing sticks out to me. You talk like you were there. How long ago was the destruction of Earth?" Jane thinks about it and goes, "About, a little under 400 years ago." "And you were there?" Klaus asked. "How's that possible?" I simply turn and say, "It is if you get the enhancement the Blues figured out I told you about before." Klaus jumped in. "Can they do that to me so I don't degrade?" I simply said, "We already gave you the nano injection. You don't have a time limit anymore." Klaus suddenly realized what was going on and immediately hugged Grace and pulled her really close. So tight I thought he was actually going to start breaking her ribs. Grace, when she could get some air in her lungs, asked to tell her what the hell was going on. Why was he like this? Linda had to translate the situation as I actually needed to get a lot of fluids and some sort of nutrition in me because I was really starting to get dizzy now. She explained that in the early 2000s by Earth calendar, physical enhancements using sonic, also frequency, nanomachines, and even light waves had allowed humans to slow down aging to the point of actual reversal, though the cost was that it degrades over time, and the more you do it, the faster the degradation. Not only that, but the more time you go in stasis, the less these actually affect you. That is, if you don't receive the additional treatment we were talking about. Grace's species had actually found a way to make the alterations stick, and because of that, he didn't have to worry about losing her again. He didn't have to worry about the rapid onset aging, turning him into some sort of senior citizen in just a year or two. Now, he could hold his woman and not have to worry about that. As Grace realized this, she realized that the same alteration can go for her too, and that's when I realized that she did have just a little bit of a baby bump on her as she rubbed the base of her abdomen. I kind of smiled a little bit, and everyone realized what was going on. Klaus himself was almost in tears with happiness, and Grace was doing her version of crying out of happiness. It was absolutely beautiful to see. As I took another bite or two and slagged some water, I go, how about how about now? Let's get these two kids home, shall we?" Linda said, "Yes. I'm pretty sure the Queen would be very interested to see this one." Then, of course, Grace kind of looked at her weird because, again, she didn't understand English. Linda translated, and then Grace asked a simple question. "The Queen? Who's the Queen now?" It only took a moment for us to pull up a picture, and the look of shock and surprise on that young girl's face, you would think somebody came up and stuck their fingers up her butt or something. We asked what was wrong, and she said something we were not expecting. "That's her, that's her, that's her," she kept saying. "That's her who?" we asked. "Who are you talking about?" She didn't point at the Queen. She pointed at the one next to her, and she said, "That's my sister." Luke then chimed in and said, "Well, maybe we should call and tell her you're coming." Then, with a very mischievous smile, she said, "No, no, no. I want it to be a surprise." Luke and I shrugged, and the girls seemed to giggle, which I didn't understand the point of that, but whatever. I simply looked at the gauges and said, "Yep, gonna take about 3 weeks." If we all stay awake and out of stasis, we're going to run out of food. So we're going to have to put a bunch of folks, actually all of you, into stasis. I'll stay awake for the 3 weeks. I turned and looked over to Klaus and Grace, and unfortunately I could only say one language at a time. But I asked, so, we only have so many pods. You guys don't mind sharing, do you? Oh, jeez. Look who I'm asking. After doing so much time on watch, this 3 weeks back to the Blues territory is really nothing. It passes pretty quick, almost like a blink. Not to mention, you got the constant fold jumps we got to go through. I got to check equipment after that's done, make sure everything didn't overheat, overstress, make sure everything goes through its cooldown, its recharge, replace parts, standard PMCS, of course, and it keeps me busy. Of course, when I have my downtime, I can't help but laugh because my brain always goes to what Klaus told us about why we found them both in that pod, both wearing absolutely nothing. And of course, he was standing at attention even though he was passed out, which of course made us laugh, but at the time we were more worried about making sure he was still alive. Klaus told us that after the Battle of Sarish, he thought he was dead. He kind of drifted around and fell asleep in his suit. Then, for some reason, he found himself being pulled in. Some sort of tractor beam pulled him into what was left of one of the Blues ships. It wasn't pressure sealed by any stretch, at least at first, they thought. But turns out it was, and they could finally look at each other, which is probably the only reason it didn't blow her damn head off. I mean, seriously, she's too cute to blow her head off. Even I can see that. Yet eventually they found some sort of leftover civilian freighter that was out there. Thankfully, it had some sort of living quarters, and they were together for weeks, waiting for any type of rescue. During that time, they got close, and they got close over and over and over again. And that's how things went. Apparently, the system only had so much air, so much energy, so they had to ditch. And there was only one life pod, so they did what they did. And now, here they are, inside another life pod together, and I swear they were both laughing. I know she was giggling a little bit as she climbed on top of him. Seriously, I know you have to be without clothing, but did she have to really do that wiggle with her butt like that? Seriously, Klaus, you lucky son of a bitch. Eventually, after many jumps in that 3 long weeks, even though it passed fairly quick, at the time it does take its toll. We finally got to Blue Territory. And I was absolutely amazed as we finally jumped in and I could tell everybody to come out of their cryo sleep. I said, hey, guess what? We got more than just blue ships waiting for us. We got humans here too. I'm sure that surprised the crap out of them over the intercoms, but at that point, I suddenly realized, yeah, they're not even close to fully awake yet, so I doubt they're going to give a shit. When we actually pulled up towards the planet, we were absolutely amazed. There was a full military honors parade set up as the ships were aligning towards the side. And as we looked down towards the planet, it seems there was a huge party going on. Wow, these two, hell, they made a splash, even though the Blues don't even know who it is yet. I guess getting one of theirs back after so many centuries is kind of a big deal. Well, who am I to say anything? It always is a big deal. To make a statement, we didn't actually mention Grace's name, her real name, until we actually got onto the planet. And, she said she wanted it to be a surprise. Sneaky girl. As we got close, I could see the Blues' homeworld called Lictica. It's a very, very colorful planet. Holy crap. It's like somebody took a rainbow, ate it, and then puked it all over this ball. There's pastel colors all over the place, flowing rivers that are so unbelievably clear that you can see the fish all the way to the bottom. And of course, massive crystal clear lakes. I was here once before, and I remember the clean air, and I tried to take a deep breath, and then I started to cough at the recycled crap that we're breathing in right now. But as I looked down, all I could see was, by all accounts, by my reckoning at least, a paradise world. On that world, there was only two issues. That was the occasional seismic activity that could be absolutely devastating, similar to earthquakes on Earth, but in their case, since they're so fragile, it can be a whole lot worse. A tree falls on them, and even if it's a small branch, it could break a major bone, which is bad. There's also a single predator to the blues, and looking at it, it's basically just a giant snake. Really decorative, too, with these weird fins that kind of like spread out. I always did wonder if the damn thing slithered underwater, too. But then again, I don't know. You can see all the way down, and this thing it blends in really well. I mean, it's green, brown, red, and yellow, all sorts of weird patterns, so it mixes in with the foliage pretty well. The only thing is, something that surprised the blues when I was there, is we could always go, there's one right there, and point it out, even if that thing was perfectly still. If it was moving the least little bit, that that snake was dinner. I remember putting a last bolt right through one of their heads and actually getting a standing ovation from the blues on the ground. And I'll tell you what, didn't want to waste it. Anything I shoot, I eat. And that snake, well, I guess the pastel colors were actually showing because it was a bit fruity. The crew had fully defrosted, so to speak, and was finally up in the bridge as we descended down towards the landing area. And we could see there was a crowd gathering all over the place. When we landed, as the doors actually opened, a few folks rushed in. We had actually asked for certain clothing, if at all possible, and it was waiting for us. They brought it on board, and everyone simply had to wait for a little while. Klaus, as I looked, was in full military Class A dress uniform with all his decorations, bells and whistles, and whatever else shit you got. Grace was in a nearly sheer white dress. I still had to remind myself that modesty is hardly a thing when it comes to the blues, which, has made some issues, but we digress. On the platform, military humans on one side lined up in formation and simply stood there at attention, not moving even a centimeter, not even looking around as they stared forward. Many of the blues found this a bit unsettling, but they realized this is the way we showed our respects. The blues on the other side had their honor guard, and to my surprise, the queen and her advisors were actually there. This was a bigger deal than I thought. We exited first before Klaus and Grace. We immediately moved off to the side as we got a couple handshakes and a little bit of an attaboy. But when the couple came down, you would swear they had just got married. As he was in his uniform, she was tucked onto his arm, and he was walking with that practiced drill walk that all military guys actually have. The moment, I've got to say, I'm glad they got it recorded because that was really nice to see. Especially since the mood was a little bit ruined the moment Grace's feet touched the ground. Then I heard in her own language someone yell, "Sister!" And a blue, foregoing any type of ceremony, burst out of the formation and ran up to Grace and squeezed her so hard and lifted her up, I thought I was going to hear bones crack, but nope. And one could say, the moment might be ruined, but I'm not one of them at this point. As they held each other for the first time in Lord knows how long exactly. Tears rolled down their faces as they spoke with each other, and I'll admit I got a little choked up. I turned to the other side, and I could see that the fleet admiral had actually showed up to welcome Klaus back himself. Before Klaus was even over to the side, a man walked to either side of him, and I could see that one was holding a folder. I was like, what the hell is going on here? Klaus was being brought up in front of the formation where everybody stood at parade rest, and before we realized what was going on, we heard one of them say, "Attention to orders!" Everyone immediately snapped to attention at that point, including myself. We watched as Klaus was actually promoted from the NCO that he was to a lieutenant right there. The men on each side even removed his stripes that he, for some reason, didn't realize were very loosely put on, and then put the bars on his shoulder. The admiral said something to him at that point. I was too far away to hear what he said, but the look on Klaus's face said it all. And also, the look on the admiral's face definitely told me everything. He had just informed the admiral that the slight rumor that was bouncing around that he had knocked up Grace was absolutely true. The admiral was shocked, surprised, and then shook Klaus's hands. This was a normal thing, of course, for us humans to simply congratulate each other. Then the fleet admiral turned, put his arm around Klaus, and kind of showed him to everybody else, and said, not just as he returned, but he's also going to be a father. And with that, everybody simultaneously went, hooah! And then everyone cheered and went up and shook his hand, congratulating him. Ever since our improvements, the amount of children being born is very low. And the fact that no blue has ever been impregnated by a human, this was a big, big deal. I looked back over towards Grace, and when I looked, she was already kneeling before the Queen. The Queen motioned and said something, and then we saw Grace stand up. And she must have told the Queen that she was expecting at that point, because the Queen had a look of confusion, fear, almost contempt, and then overall joy. The last one took over as she saw how happy Grace is, as she looked over toward Klaus, and the fact that Klaus is being congratulated for being a father now. She realized this was actually a good thing, even though this would be the first time in all of history. After all that excitement on the platform, the party moved to the massive banquet hall, and I remember this place. Whew! I swear you could park probably 24 fighters in here and still have enough room for their crews to sleep. It's crazy. Though this time it wasn't the size of the hall that overwhelmed my senses. It was the smell of all the food they had prepared, and oh, we were able to eat like kings, true kings. Anything we wanted was being brought before us. I don't want to be picky. I just grabbed whatever was in front of me and started chowing down. This will be the first time I actually had fresh food in, oh God, what, a few decades now. And it was beyond enjoyable. Oh boy. The beautiful women around also helped with the ambiance. Once my stomach started getting full, believe me, my eyes were actually filling in their version of a stomach as well. As I'm taking in the sights, I realize that a few of the soldiers and sailors are actually trying to hit on the lovely blue ladies that are in front of them. And I actually started chuckling, trying not to choke on my own food, because I remember when I was here before, I basically did the same thing. And I could only hear one that might have made any type of impression. He looked at her, and he was so unbelievably polite. And when she asked, when he got his food, if he needed anything else, he simply asked, "Can I get a hug?" She looked a little lost for a second, didn't know what that was. Then he said, "Oh, that's fine, I'll show you." He simply stood up, which surprised her as he was quite large compared to her. Then he told her to open her arms as he spread his arms as well. And as soon as she did, he stepped forward and slowly brought his hands around her back. She realized what was going on, or maybe he whispered in her ear, I don't know, but then she closed her arms around him and they squeezed just a little bit, and all I could think is, dude, don't overdo it, don't overdo it, don't overdo it. I could see his lips moving a little bit as he said something into her ear that made her blush. When they finally let go, all I could think was, dude. I mean, besides the fact that it was a taboo last time I was here, I'm pretty sure those two either spent the night together or really, really wanted to. I also watched Klaus and Grace wait up at the front table, the place of honor, and they ate and drank like a newlywed couple. There's no other way to put it. However, when Grace actually tried to grab any type of alcohol, Klaus was really fast to stop her, saying it wasn't good for the baby. I thought this was absolutely hilarious, but Grace actually turned and looked towards us, and she said, "Is it really not good for the child?" And every single human with the earshot said, "No, it's not good." She didn't understand what they were saying until it was translated, of course, but she got the message very loud and clear. I enjoyed the show, watching them be together. I mean, the only thing is, even though I was happy for them, I knew I probably wouldn't ever see them again in my time. I mean, I have all the time in the universe now, but the fact of the matter is, now that we're a spacefaring race and we're spread out so far, we don't see people all that much unless we're, close to them for one reason or another. Speaking of which, I turned and looked at the rest of the crew, and most of them were simply shoving food into their mouth just about as fast as possible. And boy, was it a sight to see. Honestly, as small as Luke is, I don't think he could fit that much mass inside his body. Eventually, though, I had my fill, and I needed to get up. I need some fresh air. Though this party was great and all, large crowds aren't really my thing. They never really were. When I got outside, I remembered I was in one of the same places I was last time I was here. I breathed in the cool, crisp air. It was so nice to have air that wasn't recycled for once. As I enjoyed the night and looked up at the triple moons that were out there, all of which were a different color, red, green, and blue, I heard a voice behind me. Of all the ships in the universe, you had to be the one to find her. I spun around and I saw a familiar voice. You're looking stunning tonight, Tori. She kind of gave me a sideward glance and said, I look the same I have for a long time, but I appreciate the compliment. Your body seems to be holding well, also. Thank you, I said, though I'm not used to being in a suit like this, as I said as I'm actually pulling at my tie. She raised her hand, tries to get me to stop. Perhaps you should wear your uniform again, she said. It always did look good on you. I turned away and released my grip on the tie, turning back to the side and looking up towards the sky. I simply said, You know why I don't ever put that on again. At that point, she stepped in close and got so close that I could actually feel her body just push a little bit against my sleeve. She then said, I was hoping you had pushed that into your past. I grinned a little bit and lowered my head before saying, It's always good to remember where you've been and what you've done. That way, you never forget who you are. I wasn't looking at her, but I swear she grinned a little bit when she said, Good. At least I know you won't forget me. She then leans into my shoulder. I then said, I couldn't forget you if I tried, moving my hand around the back and grabbing her shoulder and pulling her in close to me. There was a pause in the conversation as we both just stayed in that moment. Then she spoke. So the human you saved impregnated my aunt? She looked up at me and I looked at her for a second before looking back and saying, Is that going to be an issue? She responded with, Maybe it would have been once, but probably not now, not anymore. I then said, So, things have changed a bit around here. Good to know, as I squeezed her shoulder just a little bit. She then said, I do not know if it is good or not yet. Trying to think about it, I said, Well, we'll know soon enough. And then there was a pause again. I wanted to stay in that moment with her next to me as my hand felt that flawless skin on her arm. It was all I could do not to caress her shoulder. Boy, being a human can be tough when you got something this attractive right next to you. The celebration itself for the two coming back continued for two more planetary rotations, in other words, 2 more days, and by the end, even the soldiers and sailors were completely partied out, and that's something that's hard to do. As they get ready to leave, me and the rest of the crew were brought before the Queen. The Queen looks at us and is surprised that we're not taking a knee, but then she remembers that for us humans, bending the knee is a sign of submission, and we don't do that. We stood there, silent, simply waiting, not showing any aggressive posture at all. She then spoke. In honor of your service and bringing back one of our family we believed lost for so long, we offer you a token of appreciation. State your desire, and if it is within our abilities, it shall be granted. For a moment, we look at each other, not realizing what we should ask for, and Luke actually spoke up first. You have been very kind to us already, yet we must go back and continue our search for others and other parts of things. We must go to our job, but if at all possible, could we receive additional provisions and potentially upgrades to our vessel? That would help us greatly. As the Queen smiled at the way he put things, I was trying not to laugh because I'm like, when the hell did you talk like that, dude? I thought this as I didn't turn away from the Queen's smile that seemed to be very genuine, yet was getting wider and wider as it seemed she remembered that the thirst for riches has been made moot centuries ago as a device called compilers became a thing. With them, any refined resource can be produced, at least a non biological, so you could make gold, silver, palladium, whatever the hell you want. However, then you have to attach it to an automated design and construction piece of equipment, and it's very easy to get anything you want as long as you have certain equipment, which even a child knows how to make nowadays. It should be a note, though, that some hands on work may be required, but the parts that you're going to assemble with your hands can easily be made, which makes the whole human condition kind of weird nowadays. The Queen finally spoke and said, "It shall be," as she turned towards one of her advisors, and the advisor simply nodded, giving an agreement that she can take care of it. The Queen then turned back to us and looked Linda right in the eye. Linda thought for just barely a second. Maybe she had already figured out what she wanted to say. And then she said, "Since food is covered, I would simply desire some fitted clothing. Some of the beautiful dresses, shoes, and headgear that are here is it's all of quality and beauty you can't find anywhere else. This is my desire." "So be it," the Queen said, without any hesitation, and motioned to a separate one of the advisors, who stepped forward. The Queen simply stated after that, "She will take you shopping." I was actually put back a little bit by such a human phrase coming out of the Queen's mouth, but I also had to try not to chuckle, as Lydia seemed almost giddy at this whole idea of clothes, shoes, and everything she could ever want, even for her very tall figure. Hell, I'm pretty sure if we weren't in some sort of ceremony, she would have jumped for joy quite literally at that point. When the Queen turned her head and then asked, "And what is your desire?" It was as though she addressed Jane and myself at the same time. I don't know which one of us she was looking at, but Jane definitely beat me to the punch. She just about stepped forward when she said, "I would like to be sent to the breeding pit." This made us all turn and look at her with a "what the fuck" look. We all knew what that was. We as humans call it the breeding pit, as it's a slang term for the holding area for the blue males. This was a highly, highly protected area because so few blue males are actually born. Normally, a female that's sent in there, she's ready to reproduce, and she's there, and the males do what they are born to do, and that is breed. Constantly, sun up to sundown, and sometimes beyond that. Normally, a female that goes down there would spend a few days and is sent away by the males once she's pregnant. There's some sort of chemical signal there that the other females can't figure out, but apparently the blue males can. If a human female can't be impregnated by any of blue males, then by that, she will not have to leave until she actually wants to. The queen is actually surprised and a bit disgusted as we could see her eyes look up and down Chain's body, but began to giggle along with the rest of the court. Seems like no matter where we go, girls are girls, as they are realizing that Jane is going to end up so stuffed full of cream pies that her name might have to be changed to Little Debbie. The queen composed herself and then said, "Are you certain?" Realizing that a human female like Jane will continually be filled in every orifice, to include even her oral face, every single day for this foreseeable future. And since we've all been enhanced, that's a long time. And there's no days of rest and recover except that one time during that planet's year when the males go through their rest cycle, which is kind of like hibernation. The thing is, if they've produced enough offspring, they don't wake up from this and their bodies are simply chucked. Even with this understanding, Jane's answer to the Queen's question was simply, "Yes, please." The Queen said, "Then it shall be." Jane was so giddy she actually skipped away, following one of the court security as she left the room. It seemed as though the Queen wanted to get her out of there as soon as possible. The Queen then turned to me. "As for you, what do you desire?" she asked. I thought for a moment and said, "Well, now that my crew is short-handed by 25%, I'm going to need a replacement." The Queen then kind of was pulled back a little bit as she did not seem to like where I was going. She said, "I'm not willing to force one of my own people to travel with humans. If one were to volunteer, perhaps, then." I cut in and said, "I have an idea who may be willing to join us." The Queen at that point and everyone else was slightly intrigued. 4 days later, I'm back aboard ship, checking all the systems. And the upgrades are working out so much better than I expected. Holy crap, the startup is just not even half of what it was. The engines are running even better. This is absolutely great. Luke is so happy with the situation, he's actually whistling right now with all the new foodstuffs that are crammed in every possible corner. The provisions are now going to be much, much tastier, but I know that's not exactly what he's looking at. Certain vegetables and fruits on this planet make some of the best liquor you are ever going to taste. And I know that's exactly what he's going to be doing. I have a feeling if I end up at the rotation after him, I'm going to have to clean up the still and probably a lot of vomit. Linda, on the other hand, is smiling wide as she feels that new shawl that's around her neck. She can't wear any of the other stuff because she's working and she'll damage it. But her quarters have two very large trunks full of brand new clothes. And if I know anything about the clothing that comes here, it is very soft, very strong, and also very revealing. I figure she'll be much more comfortable actually wearing it during her watch and not while any of else are up. As Linda put it, the clothes the blues make just make me feel good and sexy. I had just finished the main power-up when I heard a voice cut through the hallways. "Everything is prepared on my end." Turning around to look, I said, "It sure is." My eyes immediately going down and seeing Tori's cute little blue butt sticking out the bottom of that dress. I swear they make all their clothes too small for this. Then I said, "All right, everybody strap in." Everybody moves over to the bridge as we strap in for takeoff. The takeoff and landing can be a little bumpy at times, so everyone has to still strap in. Just a heads up, when we get up to our position, Tori and I will be taking first watch. Linda smirked, and Luke actually said, "Got it. Just don't eat all the good stuff." I responded with interesting choice of words. Luke looked at me and said, "Why is that?" as he clicked in. I responded, "My plan is I'm going to be eating a lot." Before he said anything, I hit the boosters and up we went. The liftoff was a little shaky, which immediately got everybody's attention as they were quiet, just waiting to see if anything would go wrong. But once we got the landing gear up, we were off towards the outer atmosphere. Once we got outside the gravity well, we found a surprise. Several human military ships were actually lined up to escort us and give us a send off. They had downturned a lot of their las cannons so they could actually use them as a salute, kind of a laser light show in space. Now that we're free of the gravity well, Luke and Linda can head to their stasis pods. Once they're gone, Tori looks around and realizes there's not much going on. She asks, "How are we going to keep ourselves occupied while we continue the search for strays and anything else we might find? It sounds as though this watch is going to be boring as hell." I responded, "Don't worry. I think we can find something to occupy ourselves. That is, if you think you can handle it." She looked at me sideways. "I can handle anything you can give me." I simply said, "That's my girl." It was actually really busy for us during our constant jumps back to our sectors for searching. But once we finally got to our assigned sector, we would not be jumping for several weeks at a time. Now that we have some serious amount of downtime, all the time in the universe actually, I guess it's time to see if I can get to know my new crew mate. After putting on some music and then pulling Tori in close to dance with me, I made a mental note to send a thank you to Klaus and Grace. Thanks to them, my watch is going to be many things. Boring is not one of them.